Money as adjudication. The obsolescence of courts under evolutionary accounting. The traditional court system exists to resolve a fundamental epistemic and economic problem, determining who caused harm, to what extent, and what compensation restores the system to equilibrium. Courts are not primary institutions of justice. They are compensatory mechanisms for informational failure. When facts are uncertain, incentives are misaligned, and causal chains are opaque, societies construct legal frameworks to approximate truth and impose corrective transfers. Judges, juries, and legal doctrine function as imperfect computational substitutes for a deeper missing component, a universal, continuous, and objective system for measuring economic impact. An evolutionary monetary system eliminates the need for this substitute by embedding adjudication directly into the structure of money itself. In such a system, money is no longer a passive medium of exchange or a store of value. It becomes an active accounting mechanism that continuously evaluates the effect of every action on the total capital stock. Instead of relying on ex post legal judgments, the system performs ex ante and real-time adjustments through reputation creation and reputation burn. When an agent contributes to the expansion of capital, whether through production, coordination, or innovation, the system generates reputation, increasing that agent's command over resources. When an agent destroys capital, misallocates resources, or imposes costs on the system, reputation is burned, immediately reducing their economic authority. The legal concept of damages is not abolished. It is internalized into the monetary layer and executed continuously rather than episodically. This transformation collapses adjudication into accounting. Courts attempt to simulate what such a system would produce by reconstructing events, estimating counterfactuals, and assigning liability. However, these processes are inherently lossy and adversarial. They rely on delayed information, strategic representation, and institutional overhead. By contrast, a system that records all economically relevant actions within a shared, transparent ledger eliminates the informational ambiguity that courts are designed to resolve. The question of what occurred becomes a matter of data retrieval rather than narrative persuasion, and the question of liability becomes a function of causal attribution within a fully observable network of capital interactions. The elimination of information asymmetry has deeper implications than simply improving accuracy. It removes the very domain in which disputes arise. Disagreement in legal contexts is rarely about pure logic. It is about incomplete or strategically distorted information. When all actions, transfers, and transformations of capital are publicly recorded and verifiable, the scope for disagreement contracts dramatically. The system does not require agents to become cooperative or morally aligned. It renders deception, concealment, and opportunistic behavior economically irrational by making their consequences immediately visible and measurable. This architecture also resolves the problem of externalities, which both markets and courts have historically struggled to internalize. Externalities persist when the costs or benefits of an action are not reflected in the decision-maker's payoff structure. Courts attempt to correct this through litigation, but this approach is reactive, incomplete, and expensive. Detection is uncertain, attribution is contested, and enforcement is delayed. In an evolutionary monetary system, externalities are not exceptional cases. They are standard accounting entries. Any action that imposes a cost on the capital pool triggers a corresponding reputation burn, while any action that generates positive spillovers results in reputation creation. The distinction between private and social cost disappears because all costs are measured against a unified capital baseline. The incentive to avoid harm is no longer enforced through the threat of legal sanction, but through the immediate loss of economic capacity. Enforcement itself undergoes a parallel transformation. Courts do not enforce their own judgments. They rely on external mechanisms of coercion, which introduces a secondary problem of authority and compliance. In a reputation-based system, enforcement is endogenous because reputation directly governs access to resources, coordination, and decision-making power. An agent who loses reputation does not merely incur a symbolic penalty. they lose the capacity to act effectively within the economy. Trade partners withdraw, capital becomes inaccessible, and coordination opportunities vanish. Compliance is not achieved through external force in most cases, but through the structural dependence of agents on the network. Where physical enforcement remains necessary, it is allocated according to the same reputational logic, with higher reputation agents possessing greater authority to mobilize resources. The system does not eliminate force, it subsumes it under a unified metric of productivity. A necessary consequence of this framework is the erosion of privacy as an economically viable construct. Privacy, in this context, is not a neutral preference, but a distortion mechanism that obscures causal relationships, enables unpriced externalities, and prevents accurate measurement of value. As the cost of information storage and dissemination approaches zero, the relative cost of maintaining privacy increases. Systems that preserve opacity sacrifice allocative efficiency and incur higher conflict costs, placing them at a competitive disadvantage. Over time, evolutionary pressure selects for transparency, leading to the emergence of a global, shared memory layer that records all economically relevant activity. This layer supersedes the fragmented architecture of the internet by integrating data, valuation, and enforcement into a single coherent system. Within such a system, the court becomes a dominated institution. Its functions, fact-finding, liability assignment, and damage calculation are performed more accurately, more rapidly, and at lower cost by the monetary mechanism itself. Legal processes, which operate as discrete interventions, cannot compete with a continuous, real-time system of evaluation. The adversarial structure of courts, designed to extract truth from conflicting narratives, becomes unnecessary when the underlying data is universally accessible and verifiable. What remains is not a reformed judiciary, but its obsolescence. The concept of crime is correspondingly redefined. Instead of a categorical violation of codified rules, crime becomes any action that produces net evolutionary economic loss relative to available alternatives. This definition is not moralistic but functional. It ties directly to the system's objective of maximizing capital formation and, by extension, progress toward higher-order evolutionary goals. Punishment is not an expression of retribution but an adjustment within the accounting system, ensuring that agents who impose costs on the system lose the authority to continue doing so. In this framework, money evolves from a signaling device into a comprehensive coordination mechanism. It measures value, allocates decision-making power, enforces outcomes, and internalizes externalities within a single unified process. Courts, which exist to compensate for the deficiencies of primitive monetary and informational systems, lose their purpose once those deficiencies are eliminated. Law does not disappear, it is absorbed into the logic of economic measurement. Justice is no longer a discrete event delivered by an institution but a continuous property of the system's operation.